G'day guys, Ronnie Dale, Four Wheeling Australia. We're going to talk about the most important modifications to a tourer for off-roading. Not the top mods, but the most important modifications.
Not only that folks, we're covering two aspects here, short range touring and long range touring. So stay tuned, we'll cut out all the BS of all the stuff that you don't need, and we'll just look at the stuff that you actually really do need. Stay tuned.
The most important thing, and a lot of people will agree with me here,
tyres and lift, suspension.
They would be lift and tyres.
Put a 2-inch lift in it.
You need a slight lift.
Tyres.
suspension tyres.
The suspension.
Tyres.
Tyres and suspension. When you buy a four-wheel drive, whether it's new or used, and it hasn't been off-road before, you will notice that these vehicles have highway tyres or light truck tyres. They're good for carrying loads and stuff on the highway, gravel roads, maybe on some sand tracks, but they're not good for proper off-road, proper touring. So if you're going to go touring, you're going to need to upgrade your tyres, but I'm also morphing in here tyres and suspension in the same category here. And that's because they go hand in hand. So first off, you need some reputable tyres. So you need a decent brand, a known brand. You need to choose whether it's an all-terrain or a mud terrain. If you want to know more about which tyres to choose, there is a link down below for mud terrain versus all-terrain. So the reason why I'm factoring suspension in here at the same time is because
most people who upgrade their tyres usually go 1 or 2 sizes bigger. And to do this, it may require more clearance. To get more clearance, we do a suspension lift, because then you get best of both worlds. Not only do you lift the body of the vehicle up higher to gain more clearance, you also are able to fit bigger tyres. Therefore, suspension and tyres come hand in hand and should be done at the same time.
when we do upgrade the suspension, it needs to be an upgrade, not a downgrade. And what I mean by this is the factory suspension that your vehicle comes with is generally better than cheap 2-inch lift suspensions. A lot of people fall into the trap of buying cheap, nasty suspension to get that extra 2-inch lift, and it drives like a pig because the suspension is worse than what they had in before. So be careful there. Sometimes you're better off not even upgrading the suspension, because the factory will be better than the cheap stuff. So you need to go for a mid-range suspension to at least get par on ride and comfort. That is the main thing for four-wheel driving. Now come the rest of the stuff. The next important thing on the list are in fact these front recovery points here. You can get away with just a rear recovery point. It just means that you have to be recovered from the rear only. Some recovery points are hard to get for new vehicles, and some on like brand new release vehicles you can't even get. But you can always get the rear one so long as you have a rear tow hitch. This is a rear recovery point. Now these will be available for all makes and models. Like I said, if you have a rear hitch receiver, you can use these, and that can get you out of trouble. And these will go for about 60 bucks. But you must have one of these, otherwise you shouldn't be four-wheel driving.
In order to use your recovery points, you also need recovery gear, so don't forget about that, or you shouldn't be out there. For more information on what you actually need, there is a video link down below.
The next important thing to have for a touring vehicle, even short touring, is a Bullbar. Now I'm not including brush bars and side steps. The Bullbar is definitely an important part of a tourer. Frontal protection, especially in Australia. There are kangaroos everywhere, and it's not just at night, it's at dusk, it's at dawn, it's also in the middle of the day. I've hit stuff at times you wouldn't even expect to. And it's when you least expect it, something's gonna happen. So, Bullbars, 100% important to a tourer. And side steps and side rails, 100% not important. Handy to have on tight tracks, but it is not important to a tourer. Even a long tourer, not important. An important thing for any four-wheel drive is a deflator and a compressor. Now, a deflator isn't really a mod, that's an item, but the compressor, I consider that a modification because half of them you bolt to a vehicle, the other half come in a box. and you pull them out. Believe it or not, we're almost done with the short tourer. You don't need a lot. Let's get to one that's debatable, and that is the snorkel. Is a snorkel important for a tourer, a short range tourer? Yes and no. If you are in an area where you know you'll be frequently crossing rivers and whatnot, then yeah, you should probably get one. If you are in an area like that's really dusty, the Pilbara, if you're frequent on those kind of things where there's a lot of dust, then yes, snorkel. Snorkel is important. But if none of these things apply, if most of your stuff is highway till you get to a destination and then you go touring there, if your touring is mainly based on highways and a couple of gravel roads, you do not need a snorkel. Some people have argued that you're going to get cooler air coming in here rather than down here. It might be a little bit cooler, but it's not that much difference really, honestly. The main reason for a snorkel is you're higher up, you can wade water, theoretically, up to this point, providing everything is nice and sealed inside. That's another thing you got to make sure of. Don't want dust from down here kicking up from the tyres and water kicking up from the tyres. We want the air up here. But regardless, if you are on a gravel road and you're following someone, you are going to get dust into there regardless whether it's a raised air intake or a standard air intake. But you can put preventative measures on it. For example, the cyclonic head that the Land Cruisers come with, or you can get a snorkel sock for it, and those socks you can change out. Snorkels, important, yes and no, depending. I would say 75% yes. Communications. Does a short range tourer need vehicle mounted comms? I don't think so. Handheld will do. And you know what? A handheld can serve as two purposes. You can get out and guide someone with a handheld as well, someone else in the convoy. You could have two of these, so you could have one in the car, someone outside the car. You could use them for hiking, you can use them around camp. These are very versatile and very handy. And you could buy two of these, possibly for the same price as a vehicle mounted radio. So therefore, I say no. A vehicle mounted UHF radio or comms is not important in a short range tourer. But these are, however. These are 5 watters as well, so they got good range.
Time to up the ante and move on to the long range tourer. But as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, everything that's important for a short range tourer has already been discussed. You don't need anything else. Sure, you could put a dual battery system in, you could run a 12-volt fridge, but that is not an important modification for a short range tourer. The long range tourer is a complete different story. You're out there for longer, you're going further distances. Let's get into it.
What I will consider important and not a luxury is a battery charger, like a DC-DC, DC to DC, which a smart charger which charges from your alternator to the charger and then charges your auxiliary battery, which we're going to talk about now. An auxiliary battery is important to have for a long range tourer. And may I add, do not put your second battery in the engine bay. I cook a lot of batteries sitting right here. That is not good for a long range tourer. Put that battery instead closer to the source of where the power is needed. So for example, the reason why you would have a secondary battery or a house battery, as per se, is to power your fridge. And why is a 12-volt fridge important for touring, especially long range? It's important because you can keep your food for longer. You can keep food and drinks, meat, vegetables, that kind of stuff. You can keep that nice and fresh. So I guess the next question is, what size fridge do you need? Sorry, just getting my Barocca ready here. 2 people, you can get away with a 40-litre fridge like this one. If you have a family of 4, I would highly suggest looking at 50 to 60-litre fridge. Mine is a fridge freezer, which means that I can freeze meat and it will last even longer. It just means I have to be smart about how I carry my drinks. So for example, I don't load my fridge full of beer. There'll be 2 beers in there and a couple other cold drinks for the rest of the family. So you pull a drink out, you put a drink in. And then that way you maximize your space. But for a family of 4, recommend a bigger fridge than a 40 litre. Moving on to the next thing, and that is cargo space. Sort your cargo space out. And this is where I'm going to say, if you have a wagon, a cargo barrier, or a drawer system in the rear is very important. One or the other, because you can get away with a cargo barrier and then just put storage boxes in. That counts as storage. You don't have to have fancy drawers. However, if you do have the fancy stuff, it's much more easy to organize and it's more pleasant. You know where everything is, but it adds weight to your vehicle. The other important thing for a wagon is a roof rack, because you're limited on space as opposed to a ute. Now, on a utility, or a ute, as you know I'm in Australia, on Australian utes, a roof rack is not important. That roof rack is not important because you have your tray. But having half canopy, full canopy, or boxes on the back is important. You need to put your stuff somewhere. You need to keep your stuff away from the elements. You need to protect your gear, keep it dry, keep it dust free. In fact, storage is super important. You're going on a long trip, you got to put your stuff somewhere, you got to keep it safe. I know some of you are waiting and questioning this one, but is a winch in fact important for a long range tourer? Yes and no. If you are in convoy travel, it is good to have one winch amongst the convoy because you never know when it can come in handy. It's an insurance policy, but everyone doesn't need to have it. They are expensive. The thing is, if you are a solo traveler, and I know that a lot of Americans will say you should never go out on your own. In Australia, we look at things differently. A lot of people travel solo and go to places on their own. So if you are a solo traveler, that is a very good investment to put in your vehicle. If you're stuck in the middle of nowhere, it's going to make life so much easier to get out. It's peace of mind and it's insurance. But it's not important for a long range tourer in a convoy, so long as one person has one. That's enough. Another one you guys are gonna like, and that is lights. Are lights important? Well, yes, they are important, but to what extent and how many do you need? To be honest, all the lights I have, they are not important. Long range tourers that don't intend on driving through the night, that don't intend on driving through the bush looking for camp at night. Most people find camp before the sun goes down. And it's also a wise choice. You can see what you're doing, you can set up, there's less chance of animal strikes. I know that a lot of people will be saying you should lead by example and do the same thing. I enjoy driving at night, so that is my thing. I love driving at night. It's not uncommon for me to end up at camp at some ridiculous hours of the night. But this is for most common people. Do you need all these lights? No, you don't. You just maybe need to upgrade your driving lights or get some sort of light on your bar on the front. You don't need a roof light. You just don't need it. If you get good floodlights on the front here, that should do the job. And then just try not to drive at night. But of course, if you're into night driving like I am, go for it. But it's not important because you can alter your driving. We spoke about radios in short range tours. Let's talk about radios in long range tours. Do you still need a handheld? Yes, you still need a handheld in a long range tourer, but you also need a vehicle mounted radio as well. Because you're spending so much more time on the road and you're a more dedicated tourer, you should invest in a good quality long range UHF setup. And I wouldn't be putting the antenna on the bullbar, I'll be putting it on the roof. You're going to get far more coverage on the roof and you can get away with a small rubber ducky antenna as well, like that 3 dBi I got on the top there, or 2 dBi I might even think it is. Another important part of a long range tourer, definitely not a short range, but a long range tourer, extended fuel tanks. One thing you have to bear in mind though, how much more are you actually gaining? The particular one I have here has increased my fuel capacity by, what is it, 55 litres. 55 litres on top of what I could already carry. Plus I have a middle tank. Now you don't have to go to the extent that I've gone to. I've done it so I can go very far, like 1,700 to 2,000 kilometres on about 300 litres of fuel. You don't need that much. You just need to either upgrade your main tank, but you need to at least go for another 50 litres. Otherwise it's not worth it, because you can carry 2 or 3 jerry cans. Or you can go for a middle tank like I have, which is 110 litres. That is 110 litres on top with its own pump. That's another thing you have to consider. If you do want to increase your fuel capacity, you don't have to do it with a tank, but that's the best way because it's tucked away and it's all done properly. It's got its own pump and everything. But if you go with jerry cans, you got to put them somewhere. If you do upgrade your tanks, make sure you're actually getting something out of it. Increasing your capacity by 20 to 30 litres by replacing your whole tank, the cost isn't worth it. Carry a jerry can. So that is my list of important modifications to a tourer. I will do another one on more like a weekend warrior, truck or rig or whatever you want to call them, because that has a complete different dynamic and perspective on what it needs. And there's a few different things when it comes to IFS and solid axle vehicles. But generally speaking, when it comes to touring, short range, long range, everything you've heard here is the most important stuff. I haven't talked about awnings and all that kind of stuff, and that's because it's not important to getting you out there. Of course, shade is nice, but it's not important to get you out there. You can use an annex or something, but I would like to hear what you have to say down below. Cheers guys, see you later.